Welcome to Motorcycle.com. My name is Dominic, and today we're at Glen Helen Raceway in sunny Southern California, getting our chance to test Husqvarna's new 2019.5 FC450 Rockstar Edition. This is the second year that Husqvarna's produced the Rockstar Edition. They've carried over a lot of the traits that the bike had last year, but have improved it. Some of the improvements will include DID Dirt Star wheel set. Those are the most easily noticeable, with blue anodized hubs and nipples to match, floating front disc, split design triple clamps, FMF 4.1 exhaust, and then internally in the engine, different rocker arms, piston design, and a new bushing for the Pankel connecting rod. All of these combine to greater improvements to last year's model, help to free up the engine a little bit, and we're quite excited to see how they make a difference when on the track. So without further ado, let's go get this beautiful bike dirty and have some fun. We'll check back in a little bit and report to you everything that we experienced today on the track. Let's go take a look. We're wrapping up a great day of testing Husqvarna's new 2019.5 FC450 Rockstar Edition. Had a great day at Glen Helen. The weather held off for us. The track was in optimal conditions or optimal shape to really get a feel for this bike. And let's get into the details. First and foremost, some of the changes they've made. We'll start internally in the motor. They've kind of utilized some new rocker arms, different bushings with the Pankel connecting rod, in hopes of kind of freeing up the motor a little bit to kind of keep it a little bit more quicker revving, help it jump up into the RPMs faster, and I think they accomplished that. It's very, very noticeable how the bike tracks and how the RPM feels when on the track, whether you're going up steep hills, coming down them, or in between. The motor is very free revving and it has a lot less engine braking under decel, which is probably the biggest trait from today's test that stood out to me. Charging down some of the Glen Helen hills and some of their fast, choppy straightaways, it is very noticeable how much less the engine braking is on this 450, and for the better. I think it kind of allows you to focus on other things. We, as riders, I think, tend to rely on these modern four-strokes to help us brake in a lot of ways, but when you have the best brakes in the business, the Brembos on the Husqvarnas, there is no issue with that at all. And I think that because the motor is more free revving, it helps you kind of roll through corners better, kind of keeps the bike lighter, and then right when you're ready to stab it and get going, it's quick to do so because of all those changes they did internally. So kudos to them. To kind of tie off the motor package, obviously there's the FMF 4.1 on there. Not only does it look beautiful, it sounds beautiful, and I think that helps the bike kind of open up as well. We didn't mess with any type of insert on the muffler today. We just kind of left it as is, what you'd expect rolling off the showroom floor. Like I said, helps the motor open up and get you where you want to go quicker. So I do enjoy having that FMF pipe on the back of this bike. Of course, the standard maps, map 1 and 2, remain on the bars for easy access as well as traction control. I stayed in map 1 probably almost the entire day just because it felt best for me. The biggest difference between the two, map 1, a little bit more mellow off the bottom, but once you get mid to top end, that's where that thing rips. And I think I really enjoyed map 1 for those reasons, especially climbing these hills at Glen Helen today. It really allowed that bike to kind of get into the meat of the power and get me up them quickly. Map 2 kind of reverses it, brings the power down low on that initial, I'd say 10% quarter throttle opening, and really gives it some snap and pep. And then it kind of slowly signs off as you get higher up in the RPM. Maybe in some tracks could benefit you. Here at Glen Helen, the conditions that we had today, it was a little bit too aggressive down low. We had a couple corners with some deep ruts. There was a lot of chop today, obviously, and I think it was a little bit too peppy. Would have upset the bike a little too much, exiting corners and kind of getting to the next section of the track. Of course, traction control is there. For some, I'd say sloppy, super slick conditions, I could see that playing as a beneficial trait to this bike. For instance, super hard pack, very, very slick track, or possibly the opposite, super sloppy and muddy, kind of soupy track conditions. I think traction control would be best suited for the things like that, whereas today at Glen Helen, with the dirt that we had today, the conditions that we had, maybe not necessarily needed it. And I think for the most part, the majority of the Southern California tracks that we get to test at, traction control might not be the best thing to utilize. But if you find yourself in gnarlier conditions, like I said, maybe it's concrete, slick, or the super muddy stuff, definitely traction control can be used to your benefit. But as is, I think without it, I think the bike can do anything you need it to and more, for sure. Suspension updates. We have the WP Exact. They kind of recoin the term from AER to Exact, kind of a branding situation. They've updated a piston in the front forks, updated some settings on the rear as well. The valving has changed slightly, and there's been, I think, an improvement. We got to experiment with some of the suspension settings today for better comfort for myself on the track. When we initially went on the track, first thing in the morning, we left the bike as is, without touching anything, just as you'd get it from the showroom floor. And kind of from my personal experience, we had to make some changes, obviously, to get the bike to handle correctly. In the front, this bike comes standard with 10.9 bar in the front forks. And for my body weight, we went down to 10.6. And that's pretty much equivalent to dropping a spring rate in the front end of this bike. Obviously, you do this on the fly. It's an air fork with an air pump. You do this right at inside the pit or at your truck before you can go out to the next moto. Makes things very convenient. Keep in mind, the Husqvarna and KTM motorcycles are pretty much the last bikes on the showroom floors that are using air forks. Everybody else is kind of reverting back to the spring forks, but I think WP has done an excellent job at kind of refining and making these air forks work the best out of anybody's. There's no question about that. So with the air, it allows you a big range of adjustment, depending if you're light like myself or a little bit heavier on that end of the spectrum. So dialing in the front for myself really wasn't an issue. The rear of the bike, the rear spring, probably a little bit too much for myself, for my weight. What we did is kind of obviously set sag initially, and then we went out on high speed compression just to kind of get the bike to squat a little bit more and offer a little bit more bump compliance and comfort for me. So we got it pretty dang good for having the bike in stock trim. So if you are a little bit heavier than I am and you're kind of curious or wanting to know if this bike will be able to be set up for you, I think you'll be in perfect shape. When I talked to Andy Jefferson from Husqvarna today, one of their biggest goals was to help free up the front end, to give it a little bit more suppleness on the initial part of the stroke. And I think that it did improve from last year's model. Is it a drastic change? Not necessarily, but the littlest things do make a difference. We messed with some air pressure a little bit today. I think we stayed around the 10.6 bar mark, give or take. I went out a few clicks on compression on the front as well, just because I'm a pretty light guy. I'm only 145 pounds without gear. So these 450s can be a lot to handle on rough tracks. So that did help me kind of get a little bit more comfort out of the front end. And I think that the updates all kind of played into that as well. Speaking of the front end, the front wheel utilizes a new spoke pattern. It's kind of a 3-cross spoke pattern design, which before prior models had a 2-cross design. And biggest difference is it's allowing the wheel to flex this way, but still keeping the rigidity vertically going side to side. Again, those changes are specific just to kind of help the bike provide a little bit more suppleness, a little bit less harsh feeling in the front end. And then to round out the suspension package, while we're still on the front end of this 450, the split clamp design, those beautiful blue aluminum anodized clamps. The split clamp design specifically helps reduce stiction in the fork action itself because of the clamp, I guess the diameter you could say, or the surface area of when you're tightening the torque or the side bolts on the fork clamps on the fork leg itself. Really helps free the suspension up. If you are one of those people like myself maybe that over torque things from time to time, with this new split clamp design, you don't necessarily have to worry about it as much as before because it helps disperse that clamp or that torque strength and really keeps the front end moving as it should. So I do enjoy that. There's a different offset option as well. It comes standard with 22 millimeters, but if you pull off the bottom part of the triple clamp and remove the stem, it's kind of an oval or oblong shape. If you rotate it or flip it backwards, that gives you a 20 millimeter offset, right, just like that, without having to do anything else to the bike. These bikes, I've never had a problem with them handling well. I think that's one of their best traits, is how fun they are in a corner or rut. And I think if you were thinking about experimenting with 20 millimeter offset, you would really have to be riding in a situation that's a super tight, compact track. Supercross, arena cross, your local fairground track, just because it's going to help the bike turn that much quicker. On the normal outdoor motocross track, for the general time you might be riding the bike, I would stick with the 22 mils. I think it's exactly where you want it to be. As we move kind of towards the rear of the bike, obviously with the wheels, they've incorporated the blue anodized hubs, the blue spokes, and the DID Dirt Star wheels. So pretty much right off the showroom floor to the Rockstar Edition, it's done. It's pretty much set up for you. You don't have to worry about adding or changing out wheel sets, because not only do you get structural integrity with the DID Dirt Stars, but they look absolutely beautiful as well. So that really kind of rounds out the look of this Rockstar Edition bike. Lastly, as far as other traits that I really dig about this new model 2019.5 450, it's got the Pro Taper bars as well. I think that really bodes into some added comfort, especially in the front end. You got the Guts Racing seat cover for additional strength. I would, word to the wise, keep in mind that after a long day in the saddle, you might find yourself a little bit sore or a little bit beat up from it, but in certain conditions, if it does get wet or it does get a little muddy, you have no worry about the seat cover keeping you intact on the bike for sure. There's plenty of grip there. Needless to say, we've had a blast today at Glen Helen. This new Rockstar Edition bike is not only beautiful, but it runs great as well. Thank you to Husqvarna Motorcycles USA. Thank you, Andy Jefferson, for having us today at Glen Helen to be able to test your new beauty, the Rockstar Edition FC450. As always, be sure to go to Motorcycle.com for the full written story of this beautiful bike behind me. We'll see you next time.
Say, I've traveled on this road, they said I'd never make it.